He walked through the front door of Grace Community Church on a Sunday morning, dragging worn flip-flops across the clean tile floor, wearing dirt-stained jeans and a plaid shirt with holes at both elbows. The smell of someone who hadn't showered in days arrived before he did. The small group of people gathered near the entrance, laughing, buzzing with excitement about the arrival of their new pastor, immediately stepped back, wrinkling their noses, turning their faces away. Nobody wanted to stand too close. No one knew that the shabby man in the worn flip-flops was exactly the pastor they had been waiting for. No one imagined that in the hours ahead that dirty and smelly stranger would uncover something the church had kept hidden even from itself behind all its bright smiles and warm handshakes. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also tell us in the comments where you are watching from. New York, London, maybe South Africa or Jamaica. We want to know. Pastor Nolan Harper carried a conviction that very few pastors had the courage to hold on to. Before you can shepherd a flock, you must first know the true heart of the sheep. Not from reading membership reports, not from sitting in formal meetings with church leaders, not from looking at attendance numbers or listening to what people say when they know the pastor's in the room. You learn the true heart of a congregation by watching how people actually behave when they think no one important is looking. Nolan had not always believed this. He had learned it the hard way, the way most important lessons are learned, through failure and pain. His first church had been a small congregation of about 50 members on the quiet outskirts of the city. A modest little building with a leaking roof and a second-hand piano that always played slightly out of tune. He had arrived there fresh out of theology school, his head full of ideas and his chest full of fire. He had plans, he had vision, he had a detailed program written out in a notebook with color-coded sections. In months, he had cut the church in half. He changed the music before anyone was ready. He rearranged the service structure without asking the people who had built it. He introduced new programs that nobody had asked for and canceled old traditions that people quietly loved. He moved fast, talked loud, and led hard. And the people left, first in ones and twos, then in whole families. Those who stayed were bruised and suspicious, sitting in the pews with their arms crossed, waiting to see what else he would take from them. Nolan had stood at the front of that half-empty hall one Sunday morning and felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was not transformation. This was destruction, and he had done it with the best intentions in the world. He spent months in a dark place after that, questioning himself, questioning his calling, wondering if he had ever been meant to lead anyone at all. It was his wife, Claire, who pulled him out of it. Claire was a primary school teacher, the kind of person who could explain a hard thing simply and make you feel somehow that you had always known it. One evening, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. "Nolan," she said, "you failed because you tried to be the pastor you thought they needed without first finding out who they actually were. You started to speak." She shook her head gently. A pastor is not a manager who arrives and rearranges the furniture. He's a doctor, and a doctor doesn't walk into the room and start writing prescriptions before he's examined the patient. First you diagnose, then you treat. Nolan sat with those words for a long time. He went back to the people he had hurt. He knocked on doors. He sat in living rooms and drank tea he didn't want and listened. Really listened without an agenda or a notebook. He heard things he hadn't known. He learned names he was ashamed not to already know. He discovered that the old song he had removed from the Sunday service had been the song playing at a widow's husband's funeral, and that singing it each week was the closest she still felt to the man she had lost. He brought the song back. He apologized, not from the pulpit, but face to face, one person at a time. It took almost a year to repair what he had broken in months, but he repaired it. And when he finally left that church years later, those 50 members had quietly grown to over 100. The leaking roof had been fixed, and the old piano had been replaced by a small but decent keyboard that stayed perfectly in tune. His second church, he did everything differently. He spent months doing almost nothing but watching and listening. He visited homes. He sat at the back during services and observed. He learned not just people's names, but their stories, their wounds, their joys, their fears, the things they were proud of, and the things that kept them up at night. Only then, slowly and carefully, did he begin to lead. That church grew in ways that surprised even him, not because of programs or events or clever strategies, but because the people felt known. And people will follow a pastor who truly knows them almost anywhere. Now, with years of ministry behind him, Nolan was standing at the biggest door of his career. His denomination had assigned him to Grace Community Church, a solid, well-established congregation in a busy part of the city. The church was long established, built on a foundation of tradition, strong doctrine, and genuine community. For years, it had been led by Pastor Victor Allen, a gentle and deeply loved man who had recently retired due to his health. The congregation had said goodbye to him with tears and a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Now the church was like a house whose father had gone, waiting, hopeful, a little nervous, and they were ready for Nolan, more than ready. They had repainted the pastor's office. They had organized a formal welcome service for that Sunday afternoon with a printed program and a special choir arrangement. Someone had made a large hand-painted banner that read, "Welcome, Pastor Nolan," in bright blue and gold letters. The ladies' committee had prepared a lunch spread that reportedly included 3 different kinds of pie. They were eager. They were organized. They were, by every visible measure, a warm and loving church. But Nolan had been in ministry long enough to know that what a church looks like on its best Sunday, dressed up, prepared, expecting important company, is not always what a church looks like when it doesn't know anyone is watching. Expectations, he had learned, do not always reflect reality. And so, before his official arrival, during a long, quiet evening of prayer, a question had formed in his heart and refused to leave. These people say they are loving, but are they loving to each other? They knew each other, not loving to important guests. They were prepared for those, but loving to the person who arrives with nothing. The person who looks wrong, smells wrong, fits into none of the right categories. The question pressed on him until he made a decision. He would arrive at Grace Community Church twice on the same Sunday, the first time as nobody, the second time as their pastor, and the gap between how they treated nobody and how they treated their pastor would tell him everything he needed to know about the true condition of their hearts. He had called Claire from his hotel room to tell her. There was a short silence on the line. Then she said, "It's wise, Nolan, but be ready for what you might find." "I know," he said. "Do you?" she asked quietly. He hadn't answered that. He wasn't sure. He had found the old clothes at a thrift shop days before. The jeans with the torn knee, the plaid shirt with the worn elbows, the flip-flops with the thin soles. That morning, he had rubbed a small amount of real soil under his fingernails and along his forearms. He had skipped his shower. He had left his phone, his wallet, his wedding ring, and every other marker of who he was locked in the hotel room. He carried only 2 things, an old Bible with a cracked spine and 2 50-cent coins in his pocket. $1. Everything the beggar had. He had walked to the church in the morning heat, and by the time the white brick building came into view, neat and handsome with its tidy flower beds and half-full parking lot, the sun had warmed his shirt and the sweat had done its work. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the church for a moment. Families were arriving. Clean clothes, polished shoes, children in neat outfits. The sound of greetings carrying across the parking lot. Above the front entrance, a banner. "Welcome. All are loved here." Nolan read it once. Then he tucked his old Bible under his arm, pushed the hair from his forehead, and walked toward the door. The test had already begun. The small group near the entrance saw him coming before he even reached the steps. There were 4 of them, 2 men and 2 women, standing in a loose circle just outside the front door, paper cups of coffee in their hands, deep in a conversation that had the warm, easy feeling of people who have known each other for years. Nolan could hear pieces of it as he approached. They were talking about the new pastor, about how excited they were, about how the welcome service that afternoon was going to be something special. "I heard he's very anointed," one of the women was saying. "Pastor Victor spoke very highly of him." "The denomination wouldn't send us just anyone," the other man agreed, nodding firmly. "Not after years with Pastor Victor. They know we deserve someone good." Nolan walked up the steps toward the door. The smell reached them before he did. It was subtle at first, and then it wasn't. He watched it move across their faces the way a cold breeze moves across water. The woman who had been speaking stopped mid-sentence. The man beside her blinked. Nobody said anything rude. Nobody pointed or laughed. They simply shifted, bodies turning slightly away. A step back here, a half turn there. One of the women raised her coffee cup closer to her nose. The conversation died quietly, the way a candle dies when you put a glass over it. Nolan walked between them and pushed open the front door. Nobody said good morning. Nobody said anything at all. Inside, the foyer was cool and bright, a welcome relief from the heat outside. Fresh flowers on the round entrance table. Soft piano music drifting from the main hall. A welcome table with neatly stacked bulletins and a bowl of wrapped candy. And at the door to the main hall, Sister Marlene. Nolan had not yet learned her name, but he could read her immediately. 60 or a little older, burgundy jacket, clipboard. The composed, ready look of someone who has stood at this exact post more Sundays than she can count. A woman who took her role seriously, which was, he thought, genuinely admirable. He watched her greet the couple just ahead of him. Her whole face changed. Her arms opened slightly, her shoulders dropped, her voice rose with genuine pleasure. The Millers. Oh, how wonderful, Tom. You look so well, Susan. I love that dress. She clasped the woman's hands. She laughed at something the husband said. She leaned in like a person who is truly glad to see another person. Nolan stepped forward. Marlene's eyes moved to him. The warmth didn't disappear exactly, just thinned like warm water being slowly diluted with cold. Her hands stayed at her sides. Her smile remained, but it was a different smile now. The professional kind. The one that does its job without meaning very much. Good morning, she said. Good morning, Nolan said. He smiled at her. First time here, ma'am. She nodded once, the way you nod at information that doesn't require a response. Her eyes had already begun to drift past him toward the door. Service is starting soon. You can find a seat inside. No bulletin placed into his hands. No, so glad you found us. No, let me know if you need anything. Nolan picked up his own bulletin from the table. He walked through the door into the main hall. The hall was beautiful in the morning light. High windows, warm wooden pews, a simple cross at the front, the kind of space that had absorbed decades of prayers and hymns, and the quiet weight of people coming before God with their whole lives. About 100 people were already seated, with more filing in steadily. The low hum of conversation mixed with the piano into something that felt from a distance like warmth. Nolan walked slowly down the left side aisle, looking for a seat. The first open space he saw was on the end of a middle pew, just one seat between the aisle and a well-dressed man in a navy suit. Nolan moved toward it. The man in the navy suit saw him coming. His reaction was so smooth, so practiced, that someone not paying close attention might have missed it entirely. He simply reached down, lifted his folded jacket from his lap, and placed it on the empty seat beside him. Then his Bible went on top of the jacket, then his phone. A small fortress of personal belongings built in under seconds. He looked back up at the front of the hall. His face said nothing. Nolan moved on. The next space was in a row occupied by two elderly women near the center of the hall. He turned and stepped politely toward the pew. The woman closest to him looked up. She had a soft face, the kind of face that probably looked kind in most situations. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she said, and her voice was almost gentle. "These seats are saved." Nolan looked at the empty stretch of pew on either side of her. 3, maybe 4 seats, all of them empty, all of them apparently spoken for. "Of course," he said quietly. "Sorry to bother you." She had already looked away. He kept walking toward the back, trying one more row. A polite gesture toward a gap near the window met with a young man who spread his arms wide along the back of the pew in a way that made the space beside him feel distinctly uninviting. Nolan ended up in the very last row, the far corner where the morning light didn't quite reach and the wall was close enough to feel. He sat down, set his cracked Bible on his lap, and looked toward the cross at the front of the room. Around him, the church breathed and talked and prepared itself for worship. In his corner, there was only stillness. He didn't reach for his bulletin yet. He just sat for a moment, feeling the full weight of where he was. Not in self-pity, but with the deliberate attention of a man collecting information that the mind wants to soften and the heart wants to refuse. Then the voice came from behind him near the side hallway, low, but not low enough. "Marlene, who is that man at the back? The one who came in alone?" Nolan kept his eyes on the cross. "Don't know. Walked in off the street, I think. Possibly. Keep an eye on him, will you? I don't want anything going missing. Big day today with the pastor coming and everything. I'll watch him." "Good." Footsteps moved away. Nolan breathed slowly. He opened his Bible and found the Psalms the way he always did when he needed something solid beneath his feet. His eyes found a verse almost without looking for it. "He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap." He read it twice. Then the worship team took the stage and the service began. The singing was genuinely good. He would not take that away from them. The song leader, a young man with a strong, clear voice and real feeling in his face, led the congregation through 4 songs, and the people sang with the kind of energy that comes from actually believing the words. Hands raised, eyes closed. The hall filled up with sound that pressed warmly against the windows. Nolan sang too, quietly, alone in his corner. The usher who came down his row with service bulletins paused at each person and then stepped past Nolan without stopping, not quite meeting his eyes. He didn't call after him. He had his own bulletin. He sang the last verse of the final worship song by himself, his voice barely above a whisper, the cracked Bible open in his lap. Then Elder Donovan took the pulpit. He was a tall man, silver-haired, composed with the natural gravity of someone who had spent decades being listened to. When he adjusted the microphone and looked out over the congregation, the room quieted with a speed that told Nolan everything about the man standing there. "Turn with me," Elder Donovan said, "to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verse 25. The sound of turning pages swept across the hall. The Good Samaritan. Nolan felt something tighten gently in his chest. Of all the texts, of all the Sundays, Donovan preached well. That had to be said honestly. He was structured, clear, and occasionally moving. He used a story about his own grandson to bring the parable to life, and it worked. He held the room without effort. The priest saw the man, Donovan read, his finger tracing the page, and passed by on the other side. He looked up. "He saw him," Donovan repeated more slowly. "He didn't miss him. He didn't walk by because he failed to notice. He saw the man, and he chose the other side of the road." The hall was very quiet. The Levite did the same. 2 men of God, 2 men with titles, with responsibilities, with long records of faithful service, and both of them, Donovan paused, chose the other side. "Amen," said a voice somewhere in the middle of the hall. "The question is not whether we see the person in need," Donovan continued. "The question is what we do once we've seen them." "Amen." "Preach it." The hall warmed with agreement. Heads nodded, faces opened up. The comfortable feeling of a congregation receiving a truth they recognize. A truth about compassion, about stopping, about choosing the right side of the road. Nolan looked out at those faces from his back corner. These same faces had watched him walk to the last row and said nothing. He felt no anger. He had examined that carefully and found it was true. There was no anger in him. What was there was harder to name. Something like the feeling you get when you open a gift and find that the box is empty. Not rage, just a quiet, aching recognition. The sermon ended. Donovan prayed a strong, genuine prayer and said, "Amen." Then the offering baskets came out. Nolan reached into his pocket. His fingers found the 2 coins. He held them for a moment, feeling their smallness in his palm. The basket moved along his row toward him. He watched it pass from hand to hand, watched the bills fold in softly. When it reached him, he set the 2 coins inside. The sound they made was small and thin, a sound that stood out precisely because it was different from everything around it. The deacon holding the long-handled basket glanced down at the coins, then up at Nolan. The look lasted no more than a second and a half. But in that second and a half, Nolan read everything clearly. The flicker of something that was not quite contempt, but was its close neighbor. The slight settling of the deacon's expression into a polite blankness that was its own kind of judgment. The basket moved on. The service closed with a final song and a short benediction. People rose, and the hall filled immediately with the sound of reconnection. Laughter, handshakes, the high voices of children released from sitting still. Nolan stood. He tucked his Bible under his arm and walked slowly toward the exit. Moving through the clusters of conversation, the way a ghost moves through a crowded room, present but not seen. He passed a group of 4 men talking by the second-row pew. The same 4 men he noticed who had the widest smiles and the loudest amens during the sermon about stopping for the person on the road. None of them looked up as he passed. He came through the foyer. Marlene was already deep in conversation near the welcome table. Her back naturally turned toward the door. He walked past the flower arrangement, past the candy bowl, past the banner above the door. All are loved here. He stepped outside. The morning had grown warmer. The parking lot was beginning to fill with small groups of people who had spilled out of the church, continuing conversations that the end of service had interrupted. The sound of it reached him. Easy, genuine, comfortable. These were people who genuinely loved each other. He could hear it clearly. He stood on the front path and felt the sun on his stained shirt. And he thought, it is not that these people have no love. They have plenty of it. They just have it arranged very carefully. They give it to people who look like the people they already love. And that arrangement, so comfortable, so invisible to them, is exactly the thing that must change. He was still standing there turning this over in his mind when a voice came from just beside him. "Hey, are you leaving already?" He turned. She was young, mid-20s maybe, small in height but upright in the way she stood, like a person who had decided some time ago to stop making herself smaller than she was. She wore a simple yellow dress and flat shoes, and her hair was pulled back. She was looking directly at him, not past him, not through him, with eyes that were bright and completely unguarded. She was also, Nolan noticed, holding 2 paper cups of the coffee from inside. She held one out toward him. "I saw you sitting alone in the back," she said simply. "I thought you might want some. It's not great coffee, just so you know. But it's hot." Nolan looked at the cup, then at her face. "Thank you," he said. He took it. She smiled. The straightforward smile of someone who has done a small thing and is not looking for praise for it. "I'm Lydia," she said. "I've only been coming here about months, so I'm still pretty new myself. Is this your first time?" "Yes," he said. "Did you like it?" He considered that carefully. "The worship was very good," he said. "And the sermon?" Lydia nodded. Elder Donovan is a great preacher. A little intimidating, but great. She sipped her coffee. Then, in the same casual tone, "Are you staying for the lunch? They do it every Sunday in the fellowship hall. There's always too much food, which is the right amount." Nolan paused. In all the careful planning he had done for today, the clothes, the coins, the route to the church, the things to watch for, he had not fully imagined this. He had expected rejection, and found it. He had not expected this. A young woman in a yellow dress holding out a cup of bad coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know if I'd be welcome," he said honestly. Lydia's brow creased slightly. "Of course you're welcome. It's a church lunch. You don't need an invitation." She said it with a light firmness, the way you state a thing that should not need stating. "Come on, I'll walk in with you." The fellowship hall was at the back of the building, connected to the main church by a short covered walkway that smelled of old wood and floor polish. Lydia walked beside Nolan through it, talking easily, the way some people can talk to anyone without seeming to try. She told him she worked at a clothing store downtown, women's wear mostly. She told him she had started coming to Grace Community Church months ago, after a coworker had invited her twice, and she had run out of excuses not to come. She laughed when she said that like it was a joke on herself. "I didn't grow up in church," she said. "So everything is still kind of new to me. Sometimes I don't know what I'm supposed to do or when I'm supposed to stand up." She glanced at him sideways. "Does that ever stop feeling awkward?" "Eventually," Nolan said. "Mostly." She laughed again. He found himself thinking that there was something genuinely restful about her company. She was not performing anything. She was not trying to impress him or assess him or figure out what category to put him in. She was simply walking beside him, talking to him, treating the conversation as if it were the most ordinary thing, which he supposed it was. It was only ordinary human decency. The fact that it felt remarkable said something about the morning he had just had. They pushed through the door into the fellowship hall. The room was long and well lit with folding tables arranged in rows, each one covered in a white paper tablecloth and set with plates and plastic cutlery. Along one wall, the food had been laid out on a serving table, and it was, as Lydia had promised, a serious amount of food. Roast chicken, rice, green beans, bread rolls, and baskets. 3 pies at the end, just as rumored. The whole room smelled of it, warm and good. About 60 or 70 people were already in the hall, finding seats, loading plates, pulling chairs out for each other. The noise level was comfortable, not too loud, not too quiet. The kind of sound a room makes when the people in it are genuinely at ease. Nolan took it all in from the doorway. Lydia touched his arm lightly. Food first, then seats. That's how it works here. She picked up a plate and handed him one. They joined the serving line together. A few people glanced at Nolan as he moved along the table. He noticed the glances without reacting to them. The quick, involuntary assessments that most people don't realize they're making. Eyes that moved from his shirt to his flip-flops and back up, calculating something. He loaded his plate quietly. Chicken, rice, a roll. You want pie? Lydia asked from beside him, already moving toward the end of the table. After, he said. They turned from the serving table and faced the room together. It was, Nolan thought, a little like standing at the edge of a swimming pool and looking for a place to sit. Rounds everywhere, most of them already well populated with people deep in conversation. Groups that had formed the way groups do, organically, comfortably around existing friendships. Not hostile, simply closed. The closing that happens not from cruelty but from the natural gravity of people toward the people they already know. Lydia started moving toward the nearest table. 4 seats, 2 of them empty, 2 occupied by a middle-aged couple who were looking at their plates and talking quietly. The man looked up as they approached. His eyes went to Lydia first. A polite nod, the recognition of someone he had seen before but didn't know well. Then his eyes moved to Nolan. Something shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Actually, the man said, we're saving these for the Hendersons. Oh. Lydia looked at the empty chairs. Sure, no problem. They moved to the next table. 3 women, 2 empty seats at the far end. One of the women caught Nolan's eye as he and Lydia approached, and she leaned sideways toward the woman beside her and said something low. By the time Nolan and Lydia reached the end of the table, one of the women had set her handbag on one chair, and the other had placed a folded cardigan on the second. Saved, the woman said without quite looking at either of them. Sorry. Lydia's jaw tightened slightly. It was a small thing, the tiniest contraction of muscle, but Nolan noticed it. No worries, she said. Her voice stayed easy. They tried a 3rd table. A man Nolan recognized from the front pew, broad-shouldered, confident, one of the louder Amen voices during the sermon, looked up from his conversation as they approached, glanced at Nolan's plate and shirt, and said simply, "This table's full," gesturing to the 4 empty chairs around him without any apparent sense of contradiction. Right, Lydia said. She turned and looked at Nolan. Her expression had changed. Not angry. Something more careful than anger. The face of a person who has just seen something clearly that she had been half hoping she was imagining. Come with me, she said. She led him to the far end of the hall, past the last row of tables, to a small square table pushed against the wall near the kitchen door. It was not quite part of the main arrangement. A leftover table, the kind that gets added when the count is higher than expected. Nobody had sat at it. It had 2 chairs and the same white paper tablecloth as the others. And he noticed someone had placed a small glass of wild flowers in the center of it, the kind of small kind thing that gets done without anyone planning it. Lydia set her plate down. Here, she said simply. Nolan sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The sounds of the hall went on around them. Laughter, silverware, the particular noise of people enjoying a meal together. Then Lydia said quietly, but clearly, I'm sorry about that. It's all right, Nolan said. It's not actually, she said without heat, just plainly. Those chairs weren't saved. And everyone in this room knows what a good Samaritan is supposed to do because we just sat through a whole sermon about it. Nolan looked at her carefully. She was staring at the table, turning her fork over in her fingers. "Months," she said. "I've been here months. I don't know a lot about church." She looked up at him. "But I know that what just happened wasn't right." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." She nodded once like that settled something. Then she picked up her fork and cut into her chicken. "Well," she said, "the food's good at least." Nolan looked down at his plate. He picked up his fork. "It really is," he said. They ate together at the small table by the kitchen door while the rest of the hall talked and laughed around them. Lydia asked him ordinary questions: where he was from, how he had found the church, what he did for work. He answered carefully, saying enough to be truthful without saying more than the moment required. He was passing through the city. Someone had recommended the church. He was between things at the moment. She listened without prying, which he appreciated. At one point, a woman came out of the kitchen carrying a fresh tray of rolls and stopped when she saw the two of them at the corner table. She looked at Nolan for a moment, then at Lydia, and then something moved across her face. Not hostility exactly, but the particular discomfort of someone who is not sure whether a situation requires their attention. She set the rolls on the serving table and went back into the kitchen without saying anything. Nolan was halfway through his rice when he heard the voice. It came from the table nearest to them. 3 men, jackets off, comfortable in the way of people who consider this room theirs. He recognized one of them as the man who had called himself Whitaker during a brief exchange near the back of the sanctuary earlier that morning. The same voice that had told Marlene to keep an eye on him. Whitaker was not looking at Nolan, but he was talking in the particular way of a person who knows they can be heard and doesn't mind. "These things need to be managed carefully," he was saying to the man beside him. "Big day today with the new pastor coming. Last thing we need is distractions." The man beside him said something low. Whitaker shook his head. "I'm not saying anything about anybody. I'm just saying today of all days we represent this church to a man who's come a long way to lead us. We want everything to look right." Nolan set his fork down very quietly. "We want everything to look right." He let those words sit in his mind for a moment, turning them over, examining them. Not be right. Look right. Lydia had heard it too. He could tell by the way her shoulders had gone still. She was looking at her plate, her jaw set. "Hey," she said quietly enough for only him to hear. She looked up. "Are you okay?" Nolan met her eyes. There was something in her face, a direct, unguarded concern that had nothing calculated in it. She was not asking because it was the polite thing to ask. She was asking because she actually wanted to know. He thought about what he was carrying. The suit in his hotel room. The afternoon service in just a few hours. The revelation that was coming that this young woman could not yet imagine. He thought about what she had done today. The coffee, the walking in together, the plate, the 3 rejected tables, the corner table by the kitchen door, the small glass of wild flowers she hadn't put there but had chosen anyway. "I'm okay," he said. And then, because it was true, "Thank you, Lydia, for today. You have no idea what this meant." She looked at him for a second with a slight puzzlement, as if the weight of what he'd said didn't quite match the size of what she'd done. "I just sat with you," she said. "Yes," he said. "You did." Nolan left the fellowship hall a little after lunch. He walked back through the covered walkway alone, through the foyer with its flowers and candy bowl, and out through the front door into the early afternoon heat. The parking lot was still half full, people lingering as church people do, reluctant to let Sunday go entirely. Nobody watched him leave. He walked back to the hotel at an unhurried pace, his worn flip-flops slapping quietly against the pavement, his cracked Bible under his arm, his mind turning slowly over everything he had seen and heard that morning. The way you turn over soil to see what's underneath. He was not surprised. That was the honest thing to say. He was not surprised because Claire had warned him, and because in years of ministry he had seen enough of human nature, including his own, to know that the gap between what people believe about themselves and how they actually behave is often wider than anyone wants to admit. But knowing a thing and experiencing it are 2 different weights. He had sat in the last row while a congregation shouted "Amen" to a sermon about stopping for the man on the road. He had listened to a man worry about how things would look on the day their new pastor arrived. He had been turned away from 4 tables in a room full of people who prided themselves on being the loving kind. And one young woman, months old in her faith, still unsure when to stand during the service, had done more in one afternoon than all of them combined. He turned that over carefully too, not to make the others villains. He had been a villain himself once in a half-empty church in the city, rearranging chairs while a widow lost the only thing that still connected her to her husband. He knew what it was to be blind to your own blindness. These were not bad people. That was the important thing to hold on to. They were good people who had arranged their goodness in a way that worked for them, that served the familiar, the respectable, the comfortable. And that arrangement had gone unexamined for so long that it had become invisible to them. Like a smell in a room you've lived in too long. They needed a mirror, not a hammer. Today was not a trap, he thought. It was mercy. He would remember that when he stood before them that afternoon. Back in the hotel room, Nolan stood in the shower for a long time. He let the hot water run until the mirror fogged over completely, and the small bathroom was warm as a greenhouse. He washed the soil from under his fingernails carefully, the way you wash something you want completely clean. He washed his hair. He stood with his face under the water and let himself be still for a few minutes, which was something Claire had taught him to do before any service that mattered. Don't walk in carrying the weight of the preparation, she had told him once. Walk in clean. Let God carry what he needs to carry. He dried off and stood in front of the now clear mirror. The man looking back at him looked like himself again. He opened the garment bag hanging on the back of the door. Inside was the suit he had pressed days ago and hung carefully to keep the crease. Gray, simple, well cut, not flashy. He didn't own flashy things. Claire said it was one of his better qualities. He dressed slowly and deliberately. The white shirt first, buttons done from the bottom up the way his father had taught him, then the trousers, the jacket. He clipped his watch onto his wrist, the simple silver one Claire had given him on their anniversary. He looked at his shoes, polished and waiting on the floor beside the bed, and thought briefly of the flat flip-flops lying in the corner. He put on the polished shoes. He picked up his good Bible, not the cracked one, which he placed gently on the bed, and stood at the mirror for a moment, adjusting his collar. He thought about Lydia in her yellow dress at the corner table. I just sat with you. He thought about Whitaker not looking at him, speaking carefully about how things needed to look right. He thought about the coins dropping into the offering basket and the deacon's 1.5-second glance. He thought about Marlene's thinning smile. He thought about the empty seats filled with jackets and Bibles and handbags. He breathed in slowly, then out. Lord, he prayed, standing at the mirror in his gray suit. Let me be a shepherd and not a judge. Let what I say today open something, not close it, and give me the right words because I am not always sure I have them. He picked up his hotel key, walked to the door, and went back out into the Sunday afternoon. The church looked different when he returned. The parking lot was full now. Cars parked all the way to the edge of the property. Someone had placed small potted flowers along both sides of the front path, fresher ones than the morning, bright yellow and white, just brought out for the occasion. The hand-painted banner he had been told about was now hanging properly above the entrance, its blue and gold letters catching the afternoon light. Welcome, Pastor Nolan. A small reception committee was gathered at the foot of the steps, 5 or 6 people in their best clothes, standing in a careful arrangement that suggested someone had thought about where everyone should stand. Elder Donovan was at the front, silver-haired and composed, wearing a dark suit with a white pocket square. Beside him, a man Nolan hadn't yet spoken to, organized, looking watchful, who he would later learn was Whitaker. Then the articulate Bennett, whom the denomination had mentioned in their briefing notes, and Marlene, now wearing a different jacket, her clipboard nowhere to be seen, her hands clasped in front of her. They saw him coming while he was still at the bottom of the path. Elder Donovan's face opened into a wide, genuine smile, and he stepped forward, with his hand already extended. Pastor Nolan, welcome. Welcome. We are so glad you're finally here. The handshake was warm and two-handed, the kind that holds a moment longer than a regular handshake to say, this means something. Elder Donovan, Nolan said, it's a pleasure. Then the others came forward one by one. Whitaker, firm handshake, welcoming smile, eyes that assessed and approved simultaneously. Bennett, articulate, immediately saying something gracious and well-phrased about the honor of the occasion. Marlene. And here Nolan paused for just a fraction of a second, because Marlene was looking at him with a warmth that was completely different from the thin smile of the morning. And she had no idea that the man standing before her in the gray suit and polished shoes had stood before her hours ago in a stained plaid shirt and received something else entirely. "Pastor Nolan," she said, clasping his hand, "this church has been praying for you for months. Welcome home." "Thank you, Sister Marlene," he said it kindly because he meant it, and because he had already decided that what happened that afternoon would not be an attack on any individual, not even the ones who deserved it most. They walked him through the foyer, the same foyer, and into the main hall. It had been transformed slightly from the morning service. The front area rearranged, a chair of honor placed to one side of the pulpit, fresh flowers on the communion table. The hall was nearly full, people turning in their seats as he entered, a wave of warm applause rising naturally and spreading back through the rows. Nolan walked down the center aisle behind Elder Donovan, nodding left and right at faces he didn't yet know. He passed the row where the man in the navy suit had placed his jacket and Bible on the empty seat. The man was there now, standing with everyone else, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. He passed the pew where the elderly woman had told him the seats were saved. She was on her feet, her eyes bright, clapping with both hands raised slightly, the way someone claps when they are genuinely happy. He walked to the front of the hall and turned to face them. The applause went on for a long moment. He let it, not for his own sake, but because he could see that it was real, that these people were genuinely glad that they had waited and hoped and prepared, and that this welcome was an honest expression of something that mattered to them. He raised one hand gently, and the hall quieted. He looked out at them, all 150 of them, filling the pews from the third row to the very back. His congregation, his flock, the people he had come to shepherd. His eyes found Lydia near the middle of the hall, still in her yellow dress. She was watching him with a slightly confused expression. The way a person looks when something feels familiar, but they can't yet work out why. He smiled at her. Then he looked at the rest of the hall. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was calm and unhurried. "It is genuinely good to be here." He opened his Bible. "Before I say anything else, I want to read a few verses. Matthew 25, beginning at verse 34. The hall was very quiet as Nolan found his place in the text, not the quiet of a room waiting politely, the deeper quiet of a room that has somehow sensed without being told that what is coming matters. People settled into their seats. A child who had been murmuring something to her mother stopped. Even the air in the room seemed to slow down. Nolan read, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." He paused. "Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?'" Another pause, longer this time. "And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me.'" He closed the Bible slowly. The hall waited. Nolan set the Bible down on the pulpit and looked out at the congregation for a long moment without speaking. His hands were resting loosely on either side of the pulpit. His face was calm, not stern, not cold, but serious in the way that a doctor's face is serious when he is about to tell you something true. "I want to tell you about this morning," he said. Something in the quality of those words, something in the quietness of how he said them, made several people sit up slightly straighter without knowing why. "I arrived at this church at the morning service. I was not wearing this suit." The shift became something larger. A few heads tilted. A few brows came together. Nolan reached into his jacket pocket and placed 2 coins on the pulpit. They caught the light briefly, small silver, almost nothing. "I was wearing torn jeans," he said, "and a plaid shirt with holes in the elbows. I had dirt under my fingernails. I had not showered, and I had $1 in my pocket. These two 50-cent pieces, which I placed in the offering this morning. The silence in the hall changed texture completely. It became the silence of people who are suddenly rapidly rearranging something in their minds. The silence of a picture that has just shifted and cannot shift back. He watched it move across their faces like weather crossing a field. The man in the navy suit, his expression went very still. The elderly woman who had told him the seats were saved brought one hand slowly up to her mouth. Marlene, seated near the side aisle, had gone a particular shade of pale. Whitaker, in the third row, was staring at the pulpit with an expression that Nolan could only describe as a man watching the floor come up to meet him. I sat in the last row, Nolan continued, his voice unchanged, still quiet, still unhurried, because it was the only place I could find a seat. He did not say it with accusation. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. I heard the worship. I heard the sermon. He picked up the coins and held them up briefly. I put these in the offering basket, and when the service ended, I walked out of this building, and not one person said good morning to me or goodbye or come back. A sound moved through the hall. Not a gasp exactly, more like a collective breath that had forgotten for a moment how to complete itself. A woman in the fifth row had begun to cry quietly. Not dramatically, just the silent kind where the tears come before the person has decided to let them. Nolan set the coins back on the pulpit. I also had lunch here today, he said, in the fellowship hall. My plate was full. The food was wonderful. Thank you for that. He said it genuinely, and one or two people caught off guard by the gentleness of it made a small broken sound between a laugh and something else. But finding a table was more difficult. 4 different tables, if I'm counting right. The man who had said, "This table's full," while surrounded by empty chairs, was looking at his hands. I want to be clear about something, Nolan said, and his voice was firm now, not loud, but with a weight behind it that filled the hall the way a deep bell fills a room. I'm not telling you this to humiliate anyone. I am not standing here to punish this church or to make anyone feel small. That is not why I came. You let that settle. I came because I believe that a shepherd who does not know the true condition of his flock cannot help them. And because I have made the mistake before in my own life, in my own ministry, of assuming I knew a people before I had truly seen them. He paused. So I needed to see you. Not the version of you that was prepared for my arrival. Not the version that was dressed for the occasion and standing at the bottom of the steps with a welcome banner. He said it without cruelty. I needed to see the version that walks in on an ordinary Sunday morning and makes 100 small decisions about who belongs and who doesn't, who matters and who can be managed. The hall was utterly still. And what I found, Nolan said, is what I was afraid I might find. He looked out at them, all of them, every face. I found a church that loves God. I genuinely believe that. I heard it in your worship this morning, and I felt it in your prayer. I found a church with real knowledge of the scriptures and real devotion to its traditions. He nodded slowly. And I found a church whose love has edges. Those 3 words fell into the room and stayed there. Edges that it may not even know are there. Borders that have been drawn so quietly over so many years that they have become invisible, like walls that have always been there and so no one thinks to question them. Walls that say, we welcome the respectable, we welcome the familiar, we welcome the person who fits. His voice was still steady, still without anger. And the person who doesn't fit, he can sit in the back row alone. And when the service ends, he can walk out the same door he came in, and the world outside will treat him exactly the way we just did. Nobody moved. The text I just read, Nolan said, does not say, as you did it to the respectable ones, you did it to me. It does not say, as you did it to the people who smelled right and dressed right and could fill a seat without making anyone uncomfortable, you touched the Bible. It says, the least of these. The woman in the 5th row was not the only one crying. Now, Nolan looked toward the middle of the hall at the yellow dress. There was one person, he said, who treated me differently today. Every head turned. Lydia had gone very still. Her eyes were wide, fixed on him. And Nolan could see the exact moment the pieces came together in her mind. The coffee, the corner table, the man in the torn jeans who had said, "You have no idea what this meant." and the color rose in her face all at once. "She is months old in her faith," Nolan said. "She is still learning when to stand up during the service. She is not on any leadership committee. She does not have a title or a tenure." He looked at her directly. "But she brought me coffee when no one else would meet my eyes. She walked into the fellowship hall with me when I would have stood at the door alone. She sat with me at a table in the corner when 4 other tables turned us away." He paused. "And she told me quietly, clearly, and without making a speech about it, that what was happening was not right." The hall was so quiet that Nolan could hear the faint sound of the air conditioning. She quoted no verse. She made no announcement. She simply did what the text says. He opened the Bible again briefly. "She saw a stranger, and she welcomed him." He closed it. "In years of ministry," Nolan said, and his voice was quieter now, "I have met very few people whose faith is as uncomplicated as that, whose goodness does not wait to check whether the person in front of them is worth the effort." He looked at Lydia one more moment, then back at the congregation. "She is what this church must become." The words settled over the hall like something falling gently from a great height. "She is what this church must become." For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The hall held its breath the way a room holds its breath after a thunder crack. Not from fear, exactly, but from the sudden awareness of how much power has just passed through it. Nolan stepped back slightly from the pulpit, not retreating, settling. The way a person settles after they have set down something heavy they have been carrying all day. "I want to be your pastor," he said, and his voice was simpler now. The formal weight of the sermon giving way to something more direct. "Not the pastor of the version of this church that stands at the bottom of the steps in its best clothes. The pastor of the real one, the one that struggles and falls short and sometimes fills the empty seats with its belongings so a stranger cannot sit down." A few broken sounds from the pews. Half laugh, half grief. That church, the real one, is the one worth shepherding, because that is the one that can actually grow. He looked across the hall slowly. The way you look at something you are choosing to take responsibility for. "I am not here to embarrass you. I am here because I believe God is not finished with Grace Community Church. I believe there is more in this room, more love, more courage, more genuine faith than what showed itself today. And I believe that the gap between who you are and who you are called to be is not a reason for shame." He paused. "It is the whole reason I am here." He stepped away from the pulpit entirely, came down the 2 steps to the floor of the hall, and stood among them, not above them, not behind any furniture. "So I want to ask something of you," he said, "not as a punishment, as a beginning." The hall waited. "If there is anything in you that recognized itself in what I described today, if you heard something this afternoon that found you out, I want to invite you to bring it forward, not to me, not to each other." He gestured gently toward the front of the hall. "To God, who already knows, and who is, I promise you, far more interested in your honesty than your performance." Whitaker moved first. That surprised people afterward when they talked about it. Of all the people they might have expected, Whitaker, with his pragmatic caution and his careful watchfulness, with his "we want everything to look right," Whitaker was the first one on his feet. He didn't say anything. He simply stood, pushed past the 2 people between him and the aisle, walked to the front of the hall, and knelt down on the carpet in front of the first row. His shoulders were shaking before he reached the floor. For a moment, the hall just watched him. Then Elder Donovan, silver-haired, composed, the man whose voice filled rooms without effort, made a sound that was nothing like his preaching voice. It was small and rough and very human. He pressed his hand over his eyes. Then he stood and walked forward and knelt beside Whitaker. Then Bennett. Then Marlene, who moved quickly as if she had been waiting for permission. And now that it had come, she didn't want to waste another second. Then the man in the navy suit who walked forward with his jacket still perfectly pressed and knelt down and put his face in his hands. Then the woman who had told Nolan the seats were saved. She came slowly, her white hair catching the light, one hand steadying herself on the edge of the pew as she rose. When she reached the front, she didn't kneel. Her knees wouldn't allow it. But she stood with her head bowed and her hands folded and her lips moving in something private. Then others, then more. They came the way water finds its way, not all at once, in a rush, but steadily, each one following the one before, filling the front of the hall until there was a whole congregation of people on their knees or standing with their heads bowed. And the sound of it was not loud, but was somehow the loudest thing Nolan had heard all day. He stood among them and said nothing. There was nothing to say. This was not the moment for more words. This was the moment to step back and let what needed to happen happen. He had seen altars before, had stood at many of them, had called people forward at many of them, but he had never stood at one that felt quite like this. There was no performance in it. Nobody was watching anybody else. The people around him were not kneeling because kneeling was the right thing to do in this situation. They were kneeling because something in them had genuinely broken open. And the only response to that kind of opening is to get low. He thought of Claire. He wished she were here. You were right, he thought. Be ready for what you might find. He had found something worse than he hoped, and better than he feared. He had found a church that, when confronted with its own reflection, did not argue with the mirror. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. After a long while, the hall began to settle. People returned slowly to their seats. Eyes were wiped. Hands were squeezed. The particular tenderness that follows a hard thing passed quietly between people who had been strangers to each other's real selves an hour ago. Nolan returned to the front. "Thank you," he said simply. He looked at Whitaker back in his seat now, his eyes red, his composure largely restored, but with something different in it. Something that had not been there before. Something that looked, Nolan thought, like relief. "I want to say one more thing before we close," Nolan said. The hall gave him its attention. "What happened here today is not the end of something. It is the beginning." He let that be clear. Next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and every Sunday after that, it will be possible to go back to the old arrangements, to the saved seats and the thin smiles and the careful management of who belongs and who doesn't. That is always possible. He nodded slowly. Old habits are strong, especially the ones we don't know we have. He picked up the 2 coins from the pulpit one more time, held them for a moment, then set them back down. But I believe this church is stronger. And I genuinely believe, that the people in this room are capable of becoming what the text calls them to be. He looked at Lydia one last time. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her face still faintly flushed, and she looked like someone who had not yet fully decided how to feel about having the entire hall turned toward her twice in one afternoon. But her eyes, when they met his, were steady. "The newest among you," Nolan said, "showed the rest of us what it looks like. That is a remarkable thing. Hold on to it." He closed his Bible. "Let's pray." The prayer was short. He had learned over the years that the best prayers after a hard thing are short. Long prayers after a hard thing sometimes undo the hard thing. So he prayed briefly and with gratitude, not for what the church had done, but for what it was still capable of doing. He thanked God for honesty. He asked for courage. He said, "Amen." The congregation said, "Amen." And then, because life is larger than its most significant moments and continues on regardless, someone near the back said something quietly, and someone else laughed. A real laugh, the surprised kind, and the hall began to breathe again. People lingered a long time afterward, not with the easy chattiness of after an ordinary service, but with the slower, more careful quality of people who have been somewhere together and are not quite ready to separate. Conversations happened in low voices. Some people sat with others they didn't normally sit with. The man in the navy suit found the deacon who had collected the offering, and the 2 of them stood together near the window for a long time, talking in a way that looked serious and good. Marlene found Nolan near the side door. She stood in front of him for a moment without speaking. Up close, he could see that her mascara had done what mascara does. She looked smaller than she had at the door that morning, not diminished exactly, but more real. "I've been greeting people at that door for years," she said. "I know," he said gently. "I thought I was good at it." "You are good at it," he said. "For the people you are expecting." He met her eyes. "The work now is to become good at it for everyone else too." She nodded. Her chin was unsteady. "I'm sorry, Pastor." "I know you are," he said, "and I believe you." She pressed her lips together, nodded once more, and walked away. Whitaker came next, not to apologize with words, which Nolan got the sense was not entirely in Whitaker's nature, but to shake his hand with both hands and hold it for a moment and look at him directly. "You're not what I expected," Whitaker said. "No," Nolan agreed. "I think that might be exactly what we need." "I think so too," Nolan said. Lydia was the last one. Most of the congregation had gone by the time she made her way to the front of the now quiet hall. She walked with her hands clasped in front of her, and her yellow dress still bright in the dimming afternoon light coming through the high windows. She stopped a few feet away from him and looked at him for a moment with an expression that was equal parts amusement and something more serious. "You could have just told me," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "At the table, when I asked if you were okay." Yes, she thought about that. "Why didn't you?" Nolan considered the question honestly. "Because you weren't being kind to the pastor," he said. "You didn't know there was a pastor. You were just being kind to a person." He looked at her. "I didn't want to change what that was." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "That's actually a good answer," she said. "Thank you." She looked around the hall, the empty pews, the fresh flowers on the communion table, the 2 coins still sitting on the pulpit, then back at him. "So what happens now?" she asked. "To the church, I mean." "The same thing that happens to anything after a hard truth," Nolan said. "We decide what to do with it. Some days we'll do well. Some days we'll forget and go back to the old ways. And when that happens, we'll need to be reminded." He paused. "That's what pastors are for," she nodded slowly. "And what are months-old converts for?" He smiled. The first full smile of a very long day. "Apparently," he said, "to show the rest of us what we're supposed to look like." Lydia made a face that suggested she was not entirely sure she was comfortable with that responsibility. But underneath it, he could see that she was. Underneath it, she was exactly the person who could carry it. "Same time next Sunday," she said. "Same time next Sunday," he said. She nodded, picked up her bag from the front pew, and walked up the center aisle toward the door. At the exit, she paused, turned back briefly. "Better coffee next week," she said. "I'll bring some from the shop." Then she pushed through the door and was gone. Nolan stood alone in the empty hall for a little while. The afternoon light was long and amber through the high windows now, falling across the wooden pews in warm strips. The flowers on the communion table had opened slightly more than they had that morning, the way flowers do when the day warms around them. The hand-painted welcome banner he knew was still hanging above the front door outside. "Welcome, Pastor Nolan." He thought about what this church would become. He did not know exactly. Nobody ever does, but he had been in ministry long enough to know that the churches that could be broken open were the ones that could also be rebuilt. The ones that could not be broken open were already gone, even when their parking lots were full. These people had knelt. That was where everything good began. He picked up the 2 coins from the pulpit and held them in his palm one last time. $1, the everything of a man who had nothing. He closed his fingers around them. Then he picked up his Bible, walked up the center aisle through the long amber light, and pushed through the door into the evening. Outside, the city was still going about its Sunday business. Cars passing. Children somewhere nearby. The smell of someone's dinner beginning to drift through a window. Ordinary and continuing and full of people. Every one of them carrying something. Nolan stood on the front steps of Grace Community Church for a moment. Then he put the coins in his pocket, walked down the steps, and went to call his wife. "I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next